Peggy 18.
ここからは任天堂スイッチのヘッドラインです。ご覧ください。
For the first time in 10 years.
Hey, hello, Mekkah here, and welcome to Fire Emblem Pitfalls, where I discuss and clear up misconceptions in the Fire Emblem fandom. Today, we are going to talk about Fire Emblem speedrunning and LTCing. There are quite a few misconceptions about both of these things, and I'm going to dispel as many of them as I can. And the misconceptions I'm going to talk about today are the following. Number 1, speedrunning and LTCing are the same thing. Number 2, speedrunning and LTCing is only done by a core group of Fire Emblem elitists. Number 3, a casual scrub new beginning player shouldn't even bother getting into speedrunning and LTCing because you're never going to be as good as these Fire Emblem veterans. And number 4, Fire Emblem speedrunners and LTCers control tier lists. I'm going to tackle all these, starting with number 1, speedrunning and LTCing are the same thing. They are not the same thing. A lot of people use them interchangeably, like they will say speedrunning when they mean LTCing. To be fair, there are similarities. For one, both of them are about going through Fire Emblem games quickly, faster than most people at least. And the way the game ends up being played can often be described as strong pre-promoted paladin kills lots of enemies while a lord is being carried to the throne. This method is a natural consequence of the goals of both of these kinds of runs, winning quickly. What also doesn't help is that Don151, probably the most well-known LTCer, plays at a ridiculously fast pace when he records, so it kind of looks like he's speedrunning, but he is LTCing. So let's distinguish them properly. Speedrunning is probably a term you're familiar with from other games. The player tries to beat the game in as little time as possible, either in-game time or real time. You start the timer when you start playing, and you stop the timer when you've beaten it. The less time between these moments, the better the run. LTC stands for low turn count. You try to beat the game in as few turns as you can. That's it. There are similarities between the two, but also a lot of differences. When doing a low turn count run, the player is not concerned with how much time every turn takes. In fact, they are incentivized to milk every turn to its maximum potential. An LTC player wants to get every bit of treasure and every drop of XP that doesn't come at the cost of their turn count, in order to expand their options for future chapters. But when you're speedrunning, it's the reverse. You're racing through the game as fast as you can and you don't want to do anything unless it's going to save you time in the long run. Opening a chest takes time. Fighting an enemy takes time. Leveling up takes time. Buying items takes time. Moving a unit takes time. You want to do as little of all these things as possible unless it somehow pays for itself down the road. These huge differences between speedrunning and LTCing mean that both playstyles require very different skill sets. When speedrunning, what's being tested the most is your ability to handle the controls quickly. Button mashing, hand-eye coordination, menuing, those kind of things. This is not as important for LTCers because they can handle the game at whatever pace they want, though again I will note that Don, the most well-known LTCer, plays at a very fast pace anyway because of his personal preferences. By far the biggest key to the success of a low turn count run is planning. Not just the way they're going to clear the chapter they're on, but also future chapters. Something very important to figure out in LTCs is which units to level up. A lot of the time when people think of LTCing a game, they think of just rushing through with an early game pre-promotes, almost soloing the game, but that is actually a bad idea if you want to absolutely minimize your turn count. It is almost always faster to have more than one unit working towards the objective. LTCers are always training up more combat units or using other utility units like dancers and staff users, especially those who can use the warp staff. For speedrunners, this isn't always worth it because training takes time. Watching a unit do things like gain EXP, level up, gain stats, promote, and so on, takes up time that you're not guaranteed to make up for. Usually, for them, it's faster to take a couple of extra turns using fewer units than it is to train up more characters. Even the way dancers are utilized is different. Oftentimes, speedrunners don't even use their dancer every turn because of the time it takes to watch their animation and their EXP gain. Whereas LTCers have no reason not to take advantage of them whenever they can. Now let's make something clear, speedrunners have to plan as well. They spend a lot of time making a route that minimizes their time as well as their reliance on the RNG. But the big difference is that the actual execution phase of their runs is a lot more volatile than the LTCers. As long as an LTCer is able to finish off a map within the planned turn count and was able to fulfill any side objectives, such as getting treasure or hitting level thresholds, they will be happy with their execution and move on to the next. They will go like this from chapter to chapter, recording in segments until the whole run is complete. And once the run is done, they have no reason to go back. I've almost never seen someone LTC the same game twice. Usually LTCers switch to a different game after they finish with a run. The core of their work was planning the run. If the planning was done properly, the execution is usually just a matter of making the right inputs. If the RNG screws up something, they can just reset and record a new attempt at that chapter. That said, an LTCer will often try to maximize reliability and minimize reliance on things like lucky critical hits. I've even seen LTCers that will reset if they do get a lucky critical hit, just to show that they didn't need it to win. I've also seen LTCers sacrifice a turn or two in their run because they thought the fastest clear was too unreliable. For speedrunners, planning is only the beginning. They also have to execute everything as fast as they can while minimizing mistakes that would cost them time. Speedruns nowadays are almost always single segmented. That means they measure the time it takes them to beat the whole game in one go. They don't get to stop and save in between like an LTCer. They are allowed to reset the game, but that means they have to play a section or an entire map all over again, and that costs a bunch of time, so they try to avoid it as much as possible. The execution phase is really the heart of speedrunning. How well they can navigate the menus, how fast they can button mash, how well they can improvise if something goes wrong. These skills are tested extensively by speedruns. It's also important to note the different categories within speedruns and LTCs. In speedrunning, there are usually only a few defined ones. Binding Blade, for example, has two categories, any percent and all chapters. Any percent just attempts to reach the ending as soon as possible, and for that reason it intentionally avoids going to guidance chapters. All chapters, on the other hand, completes all guidance chapters and makes it all the way to Idun. Within those categories, anything goes to complete these objectives, killing off characters, abusing glitches, and fiddling with the RNG. For LTCs, the rules are usually made by individual players who just decide to do an LTC run, rather than the rules being set by a group of people. The most common rule is to recruit every character and keep all of them alive, but there are also runs that forego this and just go for the lowest turn count period, allowing the player to skip recruitments or even kill characters if necessary. So someone could just go, I'm going to do a Sacred Stones full recruitment LTC, and that's it, rule set made. There are other ruleset variations. LTCers will visit guidance chapters sometimes, but not always, and some LTCers like to eliminate the randomness of level ups from the equation. So for example, they could set the growth rates to 0% to show what you can do if the player is as unlucky as possible. This is the type of run that Dundon is known for. On the other hand, some players set the growths to 100%, acknowledging that to get the lowest turn count possible, he theoretically wants the best level ups possible. But instead of tediously RNG manipulating every level up, they skip the middleman and just let every unit get perfect level ups. This is what I did for my FE8 LTC run on my channel. When you decide to LTC a game, you make the rules. There is a repository for finished LTC runs, and as you can see, no two runs are the same. Almost everyone who LTCs a game picks a rule set different from the others. So as you can see, not only are speedruns and LTCs very different, there are many different kinds of speedruns and different kinds of LTCs. Number 2. Speedrunning and LTCing is only done by a core group of Fire Emblem elitists. So, since I just outlined a bunch of differences between LTCs and speedruns, it should not come as a surprise that speedrunning and LTCing are also done by very different people, and there is almost no overlap between the LTCing community and the speedrunning community. Honestly, other than me and like 2 others, I can't think of anyone who has dipped their toes into both. And what's more, both groups of players are very nice and welcoming. The Fire Emblem speedrunning community has a Discord server. The most well-known Fire Emblem speedrunners, as far as I'm aware, are Kirby Masta and Claris, and neither of them have done a whole lot of LTCing. In fact, these people are more known for speedrunning other games. Kirby speedruns his fair share of Sonic games, and Claris, well, Claris seems to be able to blaze through just about any type of game. You can find speedrunning resources on speedrun.com, where they also have a forum, though it's not particularly active right now. As for LTCing, there are LTC Discord servers. The only active one I know is A-Fish-In-Sea Emblem, which is owned by Irysa. People who have watched my channel for a while might know him as the co-creator of Plinkett Emblem, and people who have watched my channel for a very long time might know him as the co-host of my Fire Emblem 4 Reverse Recruitment Let's Play. Irysa's server isn't open to the public, but if you're interested in getting into LTCing, you can shoot him a message on Reddit. Speaking of getting into things, let's tackle pitfall number 3. As a casual scrub new beginning player, you shouldn't even bother getting into speedrunning and LTCing because, let's face it, you're never going to be as good as these Fire Emblem veterans. So speedrunning and LTCing are usually used interchangeably with being good at Fire Emblem, and as a result, both of these playstyles have this reputation for being only for the elite, not for the casual player. This is just not true. Anyone can speedrun or LTC a Fire Emblem game. Sure, you're not going to get world record on your first try, but since when is that a requirement for trying any new challenge? I think of speedrunning and LTCing as no different from any kind of Fire Emblem challenge playthrough, like a solo run or a ranked run. I like to do them not necessarily because I'm the best at them, but because I enjoy playing the game in a different way. I like the planning aspect of it, and I think it's very satisfying to beat the game so quickly. But contrary to my reputation, I'm not a pro at either of these things. This is a video of my first Fire Emblem Three Houses speedrun on the Golden Deer route. It was literally just me and a friend sitting down, putting our switches next to each other and seeing who could beat the game first. I did terribly. And then I commentated over it with Kirby Master just to have a bit of fun laughing at my own mistakes, because it was fun, even though I was bad at it. It did sort of escalate into a hobby where I actually ended up speedrunning the Crimson Flower route and even having world record at it for a little bit, at least until Claris gave it a go and put down a time I could never hope to match, but that did not stop me from enjoying speedrunning. My favorite aspect of speedrunning a game casually was improvising. Usually when something wouldn't work out or I would screw up somewhere, I'd have to improvise my way out of it, and that kind of stuff tickles my brain. It challenges me in a way that playing Fire Emblem casually doesn't. Another example of a fun speedrunning event is the Fire Emblem draft race I do every now and then. 4 of us would sit down and draft a team, and then we'd have to play through the game as quickly as possible. They were all a ton of fun, and this is despite the fact that not all of us are equally experienced. I might have a reputation of a fast player, but I'm not actually that experienced of a speedrunner. Cyan had never done any speedrunning the first time he played. Kirby Master and Gwimpage had a ton of speedrunning experience, but they still had to improvise a ton because the draft format is so different from a normal speedrun. As a result, Cyan actually managed to finish before Kirby Master in the most recent FE7 race. I cannot stress enough how accessible and amazing these racing events were. They are some of the most fun I have ever had playing Fire Emblem. I had to stay up super late since we started in the early evening for me, which is afternoon for the Americans, but I can say with confidence it was worth it. And recently I actually caught a group of other players doing an FE8 draft race, and they seem to have a ton of fun as well. Just as casually as you can get into speedrunning, you can get into LTCing. Just start your Sacred Stones game and see in how many turns you can beat the early game chapters. It starts off easy since the solution to everything tends to be just Seth, but as you go on you might find that you have to train other units to get even lower turn counts. You might want to train Vanessa because she can fly. You might want to train Franz so you have an additional combat unit to clear route maps with. You might have to train Ross just for his water walking capabilities. You might want to train a staff user so you can warp. Yeah, you probably won't get the lowest turn count possible if you LTC for the first time, and you probably won't get the fastest time on a game you've never speedrun before. In fact, if you do it without a lot of preparation, you'll probably end up far below the records, but what matters isn't being the best at it, it's whether you enjoy playing Fire Emblem this way. And that is just what this is, a fun way to play Fire Emblem. So if you've always enjoyed the planning and strategizing aspect of Fire Emblem, or you enjoy the idea of beating your own records thanks to constant improvements, or you're simply looking for a new challenge, you should give it a go. Just start your game and try, and maybe visit one of these places mentioned before. One quick recommendation though, if you're going to join a new community, I really recommend you lurk a bit before diving in head first. I can tell you truthfully that 99% of the people I've interacted with in both the LTC and speedrunning communities are nice and beginner friendly, but it's a good idea to learn of the rules and social norms a bit. There is no second chance at a first impression. For example, there was once a guy who joined the Fire Emblem speedrunning community, and he thought it would be a good idea to ask a question about certain choices made in a Fire Emblem Three Houses speedrun. And someone then explained to him why that choice was made, and he started arguing against it, as a new player. To a seasoned player who has taken a lot of time to assess these strategies, that can wear on your patience real fast. Don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with asking a question on something you don't understand, or even trying to see if it's a possible improvement to a route, but arguing with a more experienced player and questioning their choices in the routing can be perceived as very rude, and if you're going to do anything like it, you're best off phrasing it in a polite way. And if they say they've tried it and your idea doesn't work, instead of arguing about it, you're best off just recording a run of your own and start showing that it does. In fact, the Fire Emblem speedrunning community has had a bit of a problem with speedrun spectators coming in and asking for certain runs to be done, like runs where you don't kill off characters, New Game Plus runs, runs on higher difficulties, that kind of stuff. But runners weren't very interested in doing these kinds of runs, so if you are, that's okay, but in the end this is just a hobby for the runners. If you want to see a certain type of run done, your best bet is to do it yourself. And you're always free to ask for help with routing or ask for feedback on a run. Just remember that nobody owes you, it's just a hobby. These people are nice and friendly, but they're also not there to cater to your whims. Now we have one last misconception to tackle. Pitfall number 4. Fire Emblem speedrunners and LTCers control tier lists. So, first of all, straight up, speedruns are completely and utterly irrelevant for tier lists. Speedruns are almost always done on the lowest difficulty, as those produce the fastest time, and the harder routes are generally not more difficult, they just require higher stat benchmarks, more RNG manipulation, or just straight up more time to complete. Tier lists, on the other hand, are usually for the highest difficulty, but even if that wasn't the case, speedruns just never really had connections to tier lists to begin with, because tier lists just don't take the real game time into account. Tier lists and LTCs have a relationship, though not a very strict one. Tier lists kind of have to operate under the idea that beating chapters in less turns is better in order to manifest meaningful discussion, because otherwise it just becomes a matter of preference of whoever is making the tier list. Turns are useful as a unit to measure how good a character is, and that means that, for example, high movement and a focus on bases over growths ends up being pretty important for a tier list, whereas high potential through good growths isn't as important. That means Fire Emblem tier lists are usually less good for recommendations on who to use and better as a vehicle for discussion. I've always said that if you want something that tells new players what units to use, a tier list is a poor choice because they like to take character availability into account. I will always recommend someone uses Athos, for example, but because of his low availability, I can't put him high on a tier list. If you want to help a new player, you're better off giving them a character guide, which can include reasoning behind a rating as well as more elaborate advice. Some people seem to interpret tier lists as a way for elitist players to tell people what units they should and should not use, but this is absolutely not true. In fact, if you watch me play Fire Emblem on stream or on my Let's Plays, chances are I'm using at least 1 or 2 quote-unquote bad characters myself, just to spice up the playthrough a bit. If you disagree with someone's tier list or the focus on efficiency or low turn counts, you could just make your own, according to your own rules. Just know that anytime you make a tier list, someone out there is going to disagree with you, and it's very, very difficult to make a logically consistent tier list. The focus on efficient play makes that easier, I think, because everyone will have to start from the base assumption that doing things more quickly is better, but it's still pretty hard. I would love to dive deeper into this topic, but honestly, talking about this whole problem with tier lists, efficiencies, LTCs, and misconceptions about them is really something I could make a whole video about. I just wanted to clear up the basics that speedruns have nothing to do with tier lists, and why turn counts are often brought up in tier list discussions, even though very few people actually play for low turn counts. And that goes for a lot of the things I've touched upon in this video. There is a lot more to say about speedrunning as well, but I just wanted to take away the biggest misconceptions on these subjects. I hope I've managed to clear up that LTCs and speedruns are not the same thing. They are two very separate challenges by very different communities, consisting of people who, just like you, just like to play Fire Emblem. You are more than welcome to give it a go yourself, try it out, you might just like it, especially if you're looking for a new challenge. Thank you for watching this episode of Fire Emblem Pitfalls. I hope you learned something. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Anything else you'd like me to see discussed on the show, drop it in the comments, and make sure to hit the like button. I promise it won't increase your time or your turn count. Before I sign off, I would like to give a big thank you to the Fritos for editing this video and making it look gorgeous. It's thanks to his talent and hard work that this video looks so much better than my older Pitfalls videos. And it's because of my supporters on Patreon that I'm able to hire people like him to help me. So I'd also like to thank all of you who made it possible. Especially my A-tier Patreons, names on the screen right now. Usually I only list current supporters, but since this video has been in the making for a long time, I think it's only fair that I list both past and current supporters on here. And then an especially big thanks to my S-tier Patreons. You guys are the best. Abaddon 1810, Aqua Clash, Arc Holt, Beauty Incarnate, Beiku, Ben Dion, Blue Caterade, Boots 42, Colin G, Command List, Crimson Blader, Danielle, D, Faisal, Gammy, Giant Corkscrew, Ice Lake, Jagan, Jesus Kun 69, Moo, Nikhil Krishnan, P. Vladias, Riley, Reese's Puffs, Schmeep, Scott Mitchell, Severin Shear, Signo Rondo, Skylar, and Zelda. Thank you all so much. That's all I got to say. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.